Pigeons 420. Mr. Growit. And Rob from Cannabis Lifestyle TV. From the Stash Podcast.
First episode from the Stash Podcast. Finally made it happen. A lot of talk, a lot of hype, but we are here. So you may not know who we are. I don't know. I feel like everybody probably knows who we are at this point who's watching this. Otherwise, I don't know how they stumbled on this. But I'm Rob, Cannabis Lifestyle TV, 5 years, maybe 6 years on YouTube. I don't know. For a while on YouTube in particular. Also, CannabisLifestyleTV.com. Been an avid grower for 13 years now. I feel like I'm old when I say that. It's nuts. 13 years.
Crazy, eh? Crazy.
Nuts, man. And love making content. Love doing this. Love to talk. I talk too much. Don't ever give Trey time to talk on the live streams. So we're here now. So welcome. Pigeons, who the hell are you?
Man, well, first of all, thanks for having me, boys. This is gonna be exciting. I can't believe what we've gotten ourselves into. I think we've got quite a path in front of us in terms of the things that we can talk about. I finally have an outlet or avenue that I can come to just discuss or air out whatever I've got going on at any particular time. But I'm Pigeons 420. I've been on the YouTubes for, I don't even know, same thing, 4 or 5 years now, 5 years, 16 or 15 or 16. 2015, 2016. Just recently showed this mug. Maybe a month ago now, I think it's been, give or take. It's been a long time coming. It feels good to finally be able to just get that burden of anonymity, because that's really what it turned into. A lot of folks kind of thought it was more of like a gig, or it was my thing, but the reality of it is it really just turned into a burden, not being able to just open up and explain or just be who I am. And so needless to say, the last month has really been a breath of fresh air when it comes to just the creative bubble that I've put myself in, and just being able to explore the outlets of my own channel. It's really exciting. 80,000 subs, and I just never really got to just enjoy it, and for myself. And so now I've had that opportunity. So boys, Chris, Rob, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Let's have some fun.
Thrilled to make it happen. And who is Chris? Who's Mr. Growit?
I'm Chris, but most people know me as Mr. Growit. You guys can refer to me as Chris on the podcasts. I've been growing for, it's crazy to say it, over 10 years now. And got on YouTube in 2015 officially. Had a channel before the channel that I have now. That got terminated at about 75,000 subscribers. Now I'm rebuilding. I actually just hit 100,000 subscribers on my main YouTube channel. I have a second YouTube channel with, I think it has about 25,000 subscribers. My main YouTube channel talks about plants, how to grow, my grow techniques. And the other channel, second channel, is more for like grow talk, garden talk. I do a lot of light reviews on there. Not so much anymore, but yeah. I also have a book for beginners I wrote called 7 Steps to Grow Cannabis. That's available on my website. It's available on Amazon. Actually just released the 3rd edition this year. So that's doing very well. And yeah, been growing just been experimenting over the years, a bunch of different styles of growing. So excited to come onto this podcast and just talk growing.
Awesome, man. And
if
I
I may,
book on weed.
Congratulations to both of you for just hitting the 100,000 subscriber mark. Like,
thank you.
Wow.
Thank you,
Great
sir.
for you guys, man. That's a huge monumental step that, not too many people have the opportunity of doing. And you guys did it, and did it in style. So well done. And with our own challenges and hurdles, but well done. Congratulations to the both
you,
of
brother.
you.
You will definitely be there probably next week.
Due
feel
time.
Like your channel's
Due
growing
time.
like
Due
crazy,
time.
man. It's growing like an autoflower, dude. Just booming. See, and that's the thing, dude, is, with that, the growing side of things, that's going to be this first episode we're talking about, is the easiest way to grow. It sounds simple. It's like, oh, well, just get some soil, get a plant, feed it. Well, man, there's so many variables to it. And after growing now 13 years and trying so many different options and really shoot myself in the foot 9 times out of 10 in these options, I see that there is a tough way to approach it, or a more complicated way to approach it, or a simple way to approach it. And it's really just all about really the mentality going into it, in my opinion, and the knowledge too. You got to know some shit. If you're going into it and you don't really know what you're doing, it's easy to grab Jorge Cervantes' book or Ed Rosenthal and get overwhelmed or get too many things that you don't need.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the most one of the biggest variables to complicity is or complexity is overthought, trying to apply everything to every scenario when in reality, just some of the most basic things can be applied. Are you overwatering? Are you underwatering? Have you fed? Is the pot too small? Like it's not always a genetic issue or an environmental issue. It could be anything in facts, but often it's overthought.
Yeah, you can make it easy, but you can also make it complex, right? So there's so many different ways to grow. I think us three on this podcast, we have different styles of growing. I think this conversation where we talk about the easiest to grow, we probably have different opinions on different ways to grow. I personally respect any way that people decide they want to grow their plants. I know there are people out there who
Amen.
will look down upon others because they don't grow the same way that they grow. So I'm personally not like that. I encourage people to experiment and try new things. And yeah, as far as talking about what the easiest way to grow is, I think that's something is going to be a real good discussion here today.
Totally,
Well,
totally. I
and
feel so go ahead.
I was gonna say, no matter what, it's preference, and I think that's where if you shit on someone's preference, you got a problem in your personal life. It's their personal opinion and their personal preference. Like, let somebody, if they're happy with the results, let them be happy with it. If they ask for an opinion or they ask for help, by all means, give it. But otherwise, I can't stand when people do that. We're like, this is the way to do it. You're doing it wrong. It's like, I didn't ask you.
Backseat grower. Let's call it
Right.
backseat grower, right? A backseat driver, somebody who sits in the back seat,
It
tells
happens.
somebody how to drive. It's so
It
annoying.
happens.
Backseat grower, somebody who's in the comment section telling them how to grow their plants.
Yeah, it happens, and everyone's at a different stage in their growing career or their growing hobby, their life, and it's tough to look at someone who's in a position where they just started, low income, just trying to make it work, just experimenting, compared to someone who's been in this for 4, 5, 6, 7 years already, who's still experimenting, still learning, and rather they're trying to apply their knowledge to somebody who's just so much farther back on the spectrum of learning, and it happens all the time. We're always in a different spot, and we've all consumed different knowledge and information, and it's just yeah, we do it differently. Everyone does it
Yeah.
differently, and the sooner we can take that into consideration, we can all just get along and
Well, and I
just
think the
grow
first
great.
thing to look at when you've got the easiest, the first thought is budget. What's easiest in terms of budget? If you've got unlimited budget, auto feeding, whole system, light movers, everything you need, you don't have to worry about it. Totally different conversation. But if you're talking about just the easiest approach to growing, it'd probably be low maintenance, low cost. It's a factor that goes into it. Quality production, you have a certain quality, and you want yield. So these are all like simple wants, but like how to implement those for everybody's going to be different. Now, just recently, I'm talking like 3 months, 2 months, not even a month and a half, I've got into growing organics. So I've grown bottled organics in the past, a little bit different, but now a full organic medium. Like, this is a super soil that's doing everything for me, from builded soil. It's the 3.0 potting soil. It's just crazy to me when you think about a medium that packs everything that you need in there. And again, right before this, Chris and I were talking, it's not going to all the way through. You're not going to be good all the way through. But when you're just getting started, it's just water your plant. That's all you got to do is water your plant. And not really think too much about the pH, because that's what threw me off early on. Is when I first started, I would pH my bucket of water, right? And then I would add my nutrients in. I don't know what my thought process was. So then afterwards, I had like 4.6 pH, and I'm killing my plants. I just didn't know, because I'm like, oh, well, super simple. It's a 2-bottle thing. That's all I got to do. The pH just has to be to this. It wasn't as simple in my mind as what the actual grow could have been. And I think the approach of having the medium take care of it for you, it's kind of, in a way, dummy proof, because your plant is telling you what it wants. It's taking what it wants instead of you giving it that point. And when you're in control and you don't know what you're doing, that could be shooting yourself in the foot, like I did again early on.
Overthinking, and that's the case. Like, in my opinion, I think budget, and maybe this just comes from someone who's naturally under budget, or not under budget, under funded for that budget. I've always had to do things on a family budget. I got a wife, I've got a son, I got a mortgage. There's things that I need, as everyone, there's things I need to take into consideration, where I can't just go spend $1,000 on a new light when I could make that entire budget work for well under 1,000. And so when it comes to making things simple, I think things can be simple on a reasonable budget. So you're right though. If you want to make things simple and you don't have and you have an unlimited budget, then yeah, you could have auto feeders, you could have timers and gadgets and to make things just go for you. Hell, you could hire a maid and so they could come in and they could do all the work for you.
Yeah.
But I think the reality of the situation is that if you're gonna try to make it simple, you've got to make it cost effective. And to make it cost effective, you need to really look at where you're going to spend your money greater, or in areas that you're going to spend more money and which areas you're going to spend less money in. And I think that's where a good discussion could be had too, in terms of whether what kind of soil you're going to get. Are you going to get a soil that's got a nutrient already in it, so that you don't have to get nutrients? Are you going to even do soil? Or are you just going to do pellets? Are you going to do clay? For simplicity, I think that's a good question.
Yeah, I think talking about, soil, and then I know some people may say, well, coco is easier, right? So
Sure, yeah.
I guess my take on soil versus coco, when we're talking about ease, right? Ease. So if you have two plants, same exact size, same root structure, same actual container, one's in coco, one's in soil, and you water them equally, the coco is going to dry out faster. It's more airy medium, so you're gonna have to water that more often. Also, it's an inert medium, right? So you're gonna have to mix up nutrients more often than you would in, say, soil, which is more dense, holds water, nutrients. Coco, every 24 to 48 hours, you're probably adding water. Soil, you can go up to 4 or 5 days, sometimes even up to 6-7 days to add water. So you could argue that soil is easier because you don't have to water as often, but you could argue that coco is easier because you have that inert medium and you're spoon feeding and you know exactly what's in that medium. So it kind of comes down to perception as well. I personally do run soil. I like to only water less frequently.
Right.
And I also have the auto pot system, which I'm currently trying out for the first time, which has made things a whole lot easier. So as far as which medium, I personally like coco. I personally like soil. I personally think soil is easier for me.
See, and that's
I
where
also
it's like
think-
preference there completely. You know?
Totally. And I just want to make a distinction too, because I often make the mistake of conflating soil and potting mix. And I think that's a big difference, because I actually don't use soil. I use potting mix. And what does that potting
Like
mix
sphagnum,
contain?
peat moss, and
Right, perlite, vermiculite, maybe some fucking wood chips. There's a little bit of everything, and I can't say that there's no nutrients in that, because naturally you would assume that there would be something left in whatever, maybe composites that would be left in the makeup of itself. But I do often refer to potting mix as soil, and I know, although many people do the same thing, hardcore soil enthusiasts would tell you that potting mix is not soil. So
yeah.
I
People have gotten shitty with me in comment sections about that. Like, you mean you're using
make
a
that
potting
mistake
mix?
often.
I'm like,
yeah.
'cause it's
Yeah.
technically,
Soilless medium is essentially what I use.
Yeah, because
that's-
even like looking at the build a soil mix, I feel like once you add everything to it and you've got food in there and it's creating its own environment, you've got essentially a soil. But when there's nothing there, yeah, it's a soilless media. And that's where, for me, I grow coco and I grow with soil, and now, or with a potting mix. And I'm seeing the benefits of both. For me, I am a little bit of a control freak. I like to be able to know exactly what I'm putting in there, because I've got PTSD from, stressing out my plants of having too much in there. This headbanger I grow from Karma Genetics is the most finicky strain I've ever grown in my life. Love it though. Love the terps. So I sacrifice a little bit of my mental sanity for that. And with this organic side, it's been lovely. The plant is telling me what it wants. It's taking what it wants in the medium. But when I'm putting what it wants, it's so finicky that if I decide to treat it like the rest of the plants, I'm shooting myself in the foot again. So if I don't have the simplicity put in with certain genetics, whether it be simplicity of it's being done itself or I'm doing it for it, like I've got Wi-Fi OG that I feel like I got to control. If I don't, I'm seeing deficiencies pretty quickly on. So I've got almost a split love-hate thing between both sides, because I like to control everything. When it's an organic, I don't control that. what's going on is what's going on, you know, until it tells me it wants something else. When it's
Right.
coco, I can kind of fix the issue tomorrow,
So could
you know.
so could we argue then that we're clearly on like a soil / potting mix kick here? Could you argue then that a hydro system would not be the simplest way to grow?
See, that's where at the same time, I know people who are growing Lucas formula where they're just doing general hydroponics 3-system basic, and they're, I mean, pulling pretty good weight. I personally don't think the quality is as good as what it could be, but they're happy, and that's what matters most. Is as the grower, they're very happy. They're pulling, you know, 6 to 8 ounces of plant, and they're getting more harvest per year than I am because their veg time is quicker. So
Right,
and
and I
they're
don't
doing
think
nothing but changing reservoirs.
fair. Okay. That last statement's key there. Nothing but changing reservoirs. I was going to say I don't think there's an argument in like I, at least from my evidence, I've never grown hydro, but it does seem the most efficient. Well, complicated for sure, but it seems like when it comes down to the quality of the product and the end result, hydro products are just like top of the line. You know, they've got full control over the medium, full control over the nutrients, full control over the water. You know what I mean? Like intake, it's just like everything seems to be maybe we're going to talk ourselves into a hydro is more simple than medium. You know,
Well, see,
I've never done it. I've never done it. So
that's why this is a discussion
I would think you got
and not a video
come up
that's
with that
here's the
system
best
too.
way.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, coming up with the hydro system, I think would be the more difficult. But once that system's ironed out, so in fairness, if that's your first step, then no, hydro is not the simplest way to grow because you've got to establish the grow before you even get a plant in there. Correct me if I'm wrong, from a guy who's never grown hydro.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is, so you gotta put in the work initially. You can't just have a plant and get a clone and like, all right, we're good. You got to make it, you know.
Yeah, so I haven't grown DWC, but I know, for example, that's a deep water culture. For those that don't know, you know, your roots are in sort of water at all times. There are some challenges, right? So you guys mentioned that it's just changing out the reservoir. It's actually more than that. You know, water temp is something that a lot of people struggle with. If your temperature of your water, of your reservoir is not in the correct zone, which can be tough during the summertime, then you could come across things such as like root rot, for example. So that's hard to control. I think that's one of the challenges with DWC. The other thing is just constantly, you always have to have, if you're using synthetics, synthetics, you can't run organics in a DWC, but constantly have to have air stones or pump mixing those reservoir at all times. So the nutrients, you know, stay in solution. It doesn't just settle down at the bottom, right? So air stones, when you're adding in oxygen to that reservoir, there can be pH fluctuation, right? So I know one of the tips that somebody who grows DWC that's often posted on my forum is check and adjust pH twice a day. So when you get to that avenue, right, when you get a water that manage the water temperature, you might have to add in a chiller, or some people adding in frozen water bottles into their reservoir in order to kind of keep their temp down, plus pH adjusting twice a day. You know,
hats
so
off to those that are doing that.
Yeah, so it's not as easy as we may think. You know?
No,
but
and that's where you ripped
hats
it
off to
open,
those that are
perfectly.
Doing that. Right,
for sure,
right,
for sure.
And I think there's something to be said. Like if you are growing roots, like, you know what I mean? Like there's the soil people will tell you you're not feeding a plant, you're feeding the soil, right? And I would assume that a hydro, for lack of a better word, the hydro enthusiast would be feeding the roots. Like your roots are your main focus, or I don't know, not maybe main focus,
it's your lifeline.
It's your lifeline, and rightfully so, right? Like that's where everything's going in and out, right? So, and you know, I would say that is that the simplest way to grow? Doesn't sound like it. Doesn't sound like it.
That's where, when I got into organics, man, like Green Goblin 510, shout out to him. Check out his channel if you're checking this out here. He's also a member of the 420 Growers Club. But he, when he was breaking down organics to me and telling me all the stuff he put into there, I was like, that's so fucking complicated. I can't even say half those words. I don't know any of that stuff. What are you talking? Like, I feel like, and you broke it open. What I was going to talk about in a little bit here, Chris, was everything seems simple on the outside. Everything. But then you look at all the variables that come into play. You look at soil can potentially breed pests. You're going to have more IPM that you'd have to potentially deal with. Cocoa, you've got a different, pH. Your ppms could fluctuate a little bit. You could have salt buildups. You could have, more pockets. You've got less aeration. In any kind of hydro, you've got more variables that come into play, but then the benefits on every one of those sometimes outweigh the cons. Hydro, you're not going to worry about the pests like at all for the most part. You're going to have total control. Coco, same with the pest issues like that. You can treat it very comparable to hydro, but you got the soil benefits and how you grow a little bit. Soil, you've got the medium that's doing a lot of work for you. It's a lot more forgiving, and just overall, it can be a little more affordable. So it's like each area really does have its own pros and cons. And what one person, like again, Green Goblin, thinks doing everything on your own is easy. I'm like, sounds great, man, but I'm busy as fuck. I would rather buy a package that has it all for me, like I did from Build a Soil, that 3.0 potting soil or potting mix. That was
I've
already
heard
done
nothing but
for
great
me.
things about Build a Soil.
When you could buy all the stuff and mix it and let it sit and cook for 2 weeks and do all that, if you've got the time to do it. But to me, that's complicated, and not even complicated in the amount of like labor, but it's just like, man, it's too much time, too much stuff. I want to get it, open it up and get going. I don't have time. Like, I've got 2 hours today that I can work in the garden. I'm very busy. This is what I'm doing. So I sometimes I'll pay for simplicity, but at the same time you sacrifice control, or you sacrifice. So what I find simple is not simple for everybody. What another person, I've got a buddy growing, again, Lucas Formula for years. He's got Home Depot buckets, very simple kind of guy. And he thinks this is the easiest way to grow deep water culture. Boom, boom. He's like, nothing, man, just change the res. And it works. But then he shuts down in the summer. He doesn't grow in the summertime. So that's where it's like, you hit it on the head perfect there, Chris. It's like all of the cons, they can't outweigh it in DWC. For me personally, what I'm seeing today, mark the day as you're listening or watching this, I personally think an organic medium is one of the easiest ways to go about it, for the simple fact that you don't have to do a whole lot, like labor wise. But then you look at ease of use, you can't control everything. You can't do everything you want. If you get a strain that's not vibing with it as well, you're going to probably have to transplant and make a whole new mix and do a whole lot of stuff that does become labor intensive and could become less cost effective. So I don't, I guess it depends.
And you're right. And I'll defend my nutrient guys here, my bottled nutrient guys here, because I am a bottled nutrient enthusiast. Here's my word today: we are all enthusiasts. I am a bottled nutrient enthusiast, and shout out to my sponsor, Future Harvest Nutrients. It's like, I find simplicity in control when it comes to the control of the intake of the nutrients. If I know what's going into this plant, there's no guesswork. I know what's going in. I know if she's going to be overdosed because I might have slacked a little bit and just not given her the right week at a particular time, or the dose at a particular week. She might be underfed, which is almost always the case, because laziness is almost the highest variable in my garden that I compete with. And I'm underfeeding. But the reality is when the hardest part, and if you will, which I find is the most therapeutic, is hand mixing my nutrients. I've got conservatively 10 bottles of nutrients that I feed, say at full flower or the most bottles would be at early to mid flower. I'm using the most bottles. So you're using about 10 different bottles. So the hardest part about it would be just extracting the 15 millimeters, 30 milliliters of nutrients and mixing into the bottle at a time. But for me, that's the time I kick on the music. Got a little Taylor Swift in the back, you got a little Miley Cyrus, you got it blazing
down,
and then getting down, and that's my moment in the morning to unwind. This is garden choice for me first thing in the morning, so that I can get that shit done. I can get out, I can go play in the earth, and I don't have to worry about coming back and trekking things through the house. I get up, whether you got clothes on, it's optional. But the reality of the situation is, get in. If they need to be watered, you water them. If they need to be fed, you mix the nutrients, you feed them. Now, you could, in my opinion, make that even simpler, if you will, by just mixing a reservoir of nutrients and then feeding from a reservoir. But then again, waste in my house is a sin. I refuse to waste anything. And in a reservoir, changing that shit out every week, I simply cannot find a volume amount in which I'm going to use X number of nutrients before the end of that amount, before I got to pour them out and start again. You know what I mean? So I waste nothing. I try not to anyways. It's easy to preach that, but hand mix my nutrients. I take that as a moment of Zen, but control is simplicity when it comes to that point. So I could see the argument when it comes to soil, when you've got the control, hydro, when you've got the control. But for me, water, feed, done. Simple with a soilless medium.
Yeah, and let's talk about that a little bit more, right? Organic versus synthetic, right? So Pigeons uses synthetic. Rob thinks that organic is better, right? So what's
Oh, here we
the true
go, Chris.
difference? So what's the true
I'm in
difference, right?
between.
So
I'm in between.
well, okay, all right.
Yeah.
But synthetic molecules are already in a plant available form, right? So the plant can uptake it immediately. It's a smaller molecule. Organic molecules are larger. It needs to be broken down by microbial life first, right? Before the plant can uptake it. So um, some can argue that bottled nutrients are easier because they're spoon feeding. It kicks into the plant uptakes it a lot sooner. If you come across deficiencies, you can see a faster recovery. On the other side of things, the downside to synthetics is you have to mix up your nutrients once a week or have a reservoir. So that's time consuming, right? On the organic side of things, I use earth dust nutrients, which is they have a two-part. There's a base and then boost, and they're dry nutrients. Really, you can use something like Fox Farm Ocean Forest soil, which already has nutrients in it, then just top dress with their base or their boost every 30 days. So really just kind of adding water in the entire time. So as far as feeding, that can be considered easier. However, my struggles is currently I'm getting great results with organics, with earth dust, all the way up until mid flowering, and then deficiencies start to kick in. So that's, I'm getting feedback. Oh, just add a tea. Well, that, adds complexity, adds
Adds
more
another
steps to
step.
the
Yeah.
process. So one could argue that synthetics are easier just because you're able to spoon feed and you have more control. And then others could argue that organics are easier because you don't have to mix up nutrients as often, right? You're saving a ton of time there. So it could go kind of either way with me. I use a combination of both. And I get really good results.
Let it be known, like I have to almost remind myself that moment with Taylor Swift and Miley Cyrus is zen, right? Because I have to do that every 2-3 days, right? So, well, two's a little bit, but every 3 days I'm in that mode where I've got to sit down. And it wasn't just last harvest where we had 6 massive plants that were essentially underpotted and we needed to be fed way too often. And I was hauling out those plants every day, well, every second day, to get them out to the watering hole, because I don't water in my garden. It's something I advise to not do. Again, also adding more complexity, but simplicity in terms of the end result of having to deal with mess and bugs. Anyways,
That's what, even the steps where you could tell somebody, hey, this is the easiest way to do it, but then tell them every single thing that you do, and they're like, damn, that sounds like a lot of stuff.
right. There's always more to it.
Yeah, peel those layers back, and it's like, well, then on Tuesdays, what I do is it's like, oh, well, shit, Tuesdays too? Like, it's where all of a sudden now you've got so many different steps where it all seems easy until you're really in it. Once you're doing it for the first year or two, you're like, there's a lot to it. But then when you get your system and your process down, any format, any process, any way that you want to grow will become easy because you got a process, you have a routine, exactly, and it's down and it's dialed in, and you're like, I wouldn't do it any other way. That's the only way to do it.
Convincing myself, that's what it was. I was convincing myself that that's a moment of zen and relaxation. But yeah, the reality of it is that I'm trekking those plants out of the garden every day. It's a lot of work. It is a lot of work. And yes, if you were to tell someone, yeah, those when you fill them, you guys know, when you fill a plant that's going to harvest you anywhere between maybe half, 3/4 to a pound, those plants are not light after a full water or feed. They are upwards of 50 pounds of a full 7 to 10 gallon pot that's got water in it, so you're lugging that back and forth. It's a lot
awkwardly
of
too,
work.
usually between doors
To doors, because your plants are 42 inches and the doors are 32, so yeah, you're tipping one way, and yeah, it's awkward, man. But so I think, not to conclude, but I think it's a fair statement to say that, like, growing cannabis, although from the outside looking in looks quite easy, or can look quite complicated, but it can go either way. You can turn a very simple situation complicated, and I think turn a very complicated situation simple. And if I choose the latter, because that's how I got to where I'm at, because I feel like I've taken a very, not necessarily complicated, but a process that can be complicated, and found something that works for me, my environment, and my budget, more importantly. So yeah,
dude, I agree. And honestly, I think that should conclude it, man, because that caps it off. I think that really summarizes the point. And people really, if they've got anything else to add to it, of course, the comment section, cannabislifestyletv.com. If you're watching on YouTube, drop it on YouTube. If you're on Spotify or wherever you're listening to it, obviously just comment to yourself. But the main thing is just know preference is one of a huge, factors when it comes into growing cannabis. If you don't think about personal preference, you can't judge the next grower, because everybody has their own process, and what's simple to you may not be simple to the next person. So don't be an asshole.
And that's a good point. That's a good point. We can end on that, man.
Yeah. So with that being said, obviously for the crew here at From the Stash Podcast, this is episode 1. Pigeons, Mr. Growit, and your boy Rob from Cannabis Lifestyle TV. We will see y'all next time.